And thank you so much for coming back to watch our series on the reflections of your mirror. We're giving you a sneak peek on the content that M.Ss has curated for her book that's due to launch in 2021. We have covered several important subjects regarding relationships and personal introspect and how to better connect with your loved ones and have healthy relationships. And today we're doing everything on codependency. Before we go into the meat of the video, I just want to introduce myself. I am Jessica Arenas. I am an advocate for mental health and self-development, and I have the pleasure of being a part of M.Ss in terms of her launching of her book, and also just sharing her knowledge and experience as a clinician, and even sharing part of her own personal experience on how this has helped her have better relationships in her life. So M.Ss, thank you again for taking the time to getting together again and sharing so much wealth of knowledge with our viewers.
Thank you, Jessie, again, and thank you to all our viewers. Welcome back.
Wonderful. So today I just want to give people like a brief preview on what we're going to be talking about. Most of our videos, our first video was like an hour long, and thank you so much everybody for sticking around and making that an event for yourselves. And the others have been cut down to half. So these will be short videos, and then we're also doing Spanish versions of them. So if you have a loved one, a friend, a family member that you feel that could benefit from learning about these types of subjects regarding relationships and healthy relationships, please share. Like and subscribe on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and I will link all of the information down at the bottom. So for this video, it's going to be a two-part series, and we're going to just talk about what is codependency and how does it begin in our lives. So the first question, M.Ss, we were just wanting to just simplify it for our viewers. Can you tell us what is codependency? Because we do hear this term, oh, you're codependent or that's codependent, but what is it really from the clinical aspect, and what are some signs that we can look for in ourselves that could mean that we are codependent?
Yeah, we need to clarify that, because as you said, Jessie, it has become very popular and people use it all the time, and sometimes, they use it in the wrong way. So I'm going to give you a little bit of feedback, some education about it. The term or the concept just first came about in the field of psychology, like in the 1940s by a psychiatrist. And it was used to describe, because there was identified that there's a group of people, a large group of people, with a tendency to show certain traits when it comes to their relationships. And when I say relationships, includes all kinds of relationships, but it gets more emphasized with the romantic, intimate relationships. So these characteristics entailed the necessity for approval as the main priority in their lives. So people who have codependency traits, they tend to put the need to be approved by other people, to be loved, to be accepted above anything. They sacrifice everything to supply that need. And there's that need, that necessity to be needed. So this translates into some behaviors that show up, that get repeated in every relationship that they have. And they, like I said, they're more emphasized in the intimate relationships, because it is the most traumatic, the most that kind of simulates our upbringing and the relationship that we have with our parents, and the one that reflects the most the emotional traumas that we bring from our childhood. Okay. So the term, was used to describe that. And then later on in the field of substance abuse, it was discovered that people who have a high level of codependency, they tend to attract partners that are inclined, to substance abuse and addictions, or other type of behaviors like, narcissistic personality disorders, abusive personalities. So there is a clique of personalities that occur when you have those tendencies, and you tend to attract and repeat those relationships in your life.
Right. Edie, when you say that they need to feel validated or needed, can you give a few examples just of what that may look like in these intimate or romantic relationships?
Yeah, if I just want to give you a few examples of actual behaviors that tend to happen with people who suffer from codependency. They often feel in relationships like they're walking on eggshells. They feel very anxious when they are in a relationship. They feel unsafe in a relationship. They frequently have thoughts of abandonment. And let me clarify, Jessie, that the theme with codependency, what's in the background of codependency is a lot of anxiety, but the belief system has to do with lack of self-love. So because of a lack of self-love, people with high levels of codependency, they do not have their own identity. They're not in touch with their own identity, with their own true self. So they seek relationships as a way to compensate for that. And they kind of like submerge themselves into the other person's life. Some of the other traits that they have issues with trust, jealousy, and sometimes cheating is a big issue with people in codependency. They are people's pleasers. They tend to sacrifice their own needs and their own freedom in order to maintain the relationship, because the core value of the codependent person is to maintain the relationship at all risk, no matter what. That's the main priority, is to seek to achieve the approval and the love of the other person, no matter what. So they sacrifice whatever they need to sacrifice. They have difficulty setting boundaries. They have difficulty saying no. They have difficulty maintaining, their own values, their own needs. They always put the relationship, above that. They want to control their partner's behaviors. They tend to be rescuers. Sometimes the codependent person looks like the victim in the relationship, and sometimes that victimization is used as a way to control the partner. So one thing that I wanted to say also, Jessie, is that there's a lot of people that confuse codependency with pure love or romantic true love, and it has been advertised that way. It has been very romanticized.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when you confront people about their codependency, they get offended because they think that they're just too good, and that they're such givers that they love unconditionally. And there's nothing farther from unconditional love than codependent love, because codependent love is about survival. It's about, let me see what I can do to keep this person dependent on me and needing me so much that I will never be abandoned.
Wow.
So that's pretty much, the subconscious mentality of the codependent person.
And how does that codependent person, and just for the viewers, and you've been so gracious with allowing me to share my own experiences through this, and I joked around and said that this is like a processing group for me. But no, guys, I actually go to a group. I do go to my own therapy. This is not my therapist. But regarding, like, I just don't want people to feel like they're alone on this. I don't want the individual watching this thinking, this sounds like me, and I don't know anyone else that I can identify with. Or so, hi, I was a codependent.
We're all
I'm in recovery codependent. Nice to meet you. You've come to the right place. And everything Edie's described, that was me. I was the rescuer. I overextended myself, and I thought, like, and I ended up controlling that person, hoping to change them in the way that they needed to be changed for my own benefit. And that's not real love. That's not true love. And Edith will get into that more. But how do we learn this behavior? Because when we're born into the world, we don't know anything. So where do we pick this up from?
Well, I would like to add also that there's a cultural factor to it. Culturally, we have been trained, we have been taught to be codependent. Some cultures more than others, but our Hispanic culture, I think, is highly codependent. And it is perceived as love. So there is one cultural value to it, and that's something that we need to break down and kind of evolve from that. But when it comes to how we learn that behavior, there is several factors and there's several environments in which codependency is learned. And one of them is by growing up in a dysfunctional family where, there is any type of addictive behavior. It could be, alcoholism, it could be addiction, there could be domestic violence, there could be physical, psychological abuse, verbal abuse. Being in an environment in which you feel neglected, you feel unsafe, and somehow the whole family revolves around the behavior of the abuser or the addict, or any other type of behavior that seems to be like the center of the family. So having grown up in an environment like that makes you kind of learn the anxiety of having to walk on eggshells all the time and constantly reacting to the environment, because the environment is unpredictable when you grow up in a dysfunctional family. So the codependent person doesn't learn how to have their own autonomy because their life is constantly threatened and constantly revolving around what is this other person going to do, with whether it's one of your parents, or your siblings, or any other member. So growing up in that environment brings about a high degree of codependency. Another environment that brings codependency, like we've talked about before, it's the overprotective kind of family. The family where there is a lot of fears, a lot of anxiety, a lot of control. You learn that by imitating your parents. There's also some genetic compound to it, because if there is anxiety in your background, in your parents and grandparents, you might, bring that syndrome, a little bit of the syndrome genetically. But what I give most of the credit to is the environment. So growing up in an environment in which they, because of their own fear, they protect you and they make you feel insecure. And they make you feel that the world is an unsafe place. You learn how to do that, and you learn to rely on other people in order to survive. So you kind of detach from your own self, and you don't learn your own tools and your own way of surviving and being self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. So that generates a lot of insecurity. So codependency is very much related to anxiety disorder, and very much related to low self-esteem. Those are the main denominators there.
Okay. And I think even because in one video before you were giving that example about environment, I want to say I was looking at my notes. It was regarding self-awareness, like how do we teach children self-awareness? And you were saying by being the example. And so I think that's why it's so valuable to always go back to our environment growing up. I think that's awesome how you always reference that, because a lot of times what I've learned from people that I speak to and people that have shared things that they've lived through or that they're living through, and I just start asking just like casually, what was your childhood like, and things like that? Like, how did your mom handle these certain scenarios? Had you ever been exposed to a relationship like this, and that's why you accepted it? And that's all through my own personal work and just having this awareness and having friends and colleagues that are amazing in the clinical world, especially yourself. But I remember you saying, just like Abigail, like, how you handle yourself and carry yourself, she's absorbing that. And that's something that stood out for me when you said the low self-esteem part, like that goes into so many other areas, not just codependency as one of, like, I guess, what would you call it? It would be the effect, like that the cause is how I would show her how to have good self-esteem, and then the effect would be being codependent if it wasn't a healthy way to show her. But what was that? I was going somewhere with that. Anyway, sorry, Edie's.
It's okay. It's okay.
I was going somewhere with that, and it went to the other direction. But yeah, I think, I remember the podcast that I had shared with you, Unraveled. Lindsay, I pulled it up, Janet Lansbury, the podcast.
Yeah, the parenting skills. Yeah.
And so she talks about how when we reward bad behavior with children, like, you're really teaching them how to be people pleasers in the long run, because you're just giving them what they want and, like, rewarding them for bad behavior. And so when they grow up and they see bad behavior around them, they don't want to deal with resolving the issue. They want to just, here, what do you want? Here you go. And then they develop codependency and low self-esteem, and because they're not really walking in their truth, they're just repeating this behavior that was done to them from young. So that it just reminded me of that.
Yeah, the behavior that was rewarded. Codependency at all levels, whether it's in a romantic relationship or any relationship, and also in families and between parents and children, gets confused with unconditional love. See, parents, for example, have this tendency that, I'll die for my child, okay? And I do anything and I tolerate anything. And I see a lot of parents with that, profile type of thinking. And what they do is that they tolerate abuse from their own children because they don't love themselves. And with this concept of unconditional love, that I do anything for my child, what they teach the children is to be, classic narcissist, because they get spoiled and you reward them for the wrong behavior. So when it comes to unconditional love as a parent, you got to prepare that child to be an accepted human being for society. It's fit human being for society, not for you. It's not, for you to give them everything and to feel guilty if you don't have something, that they want. On the contrary, you have to love them so much that you have to put their happiness and their emotional balance above anything, even if you have to do something that they will not like you for it, which is being, the disciplinary, which, is something that we parents don't like to do it, because we feel like so inclined to, give our kids everything and want them to be pleased and happy all the time. But you need to create a balance. And part of unconditional love is setting boundaries and teaching them to be good human beings and to respect other people. And by doing, and to do that, you got to respect yourself as a human being, and you have to set boundaries with your own kids and with your spouse. It doesn't matter how much you love the other person, but loving yourself is an example that you're showing them in order for them to do the same thing when there will be time for them to relate to other people and apply those principles.
Yes. And so once someone identifies that they're potentially codependent or in a codependent relationship, and one of our first videos was change is attainable. So I'm sure viewers are thinking, how can I change this? I'm seeing a pattern after watching and listening to Edie's. What are some steps that they can take to start making a difference in this behavior for themselves and for their loved ones if they see it in them?
The theme of self-awareness keeps coming back, because one of the things that people do in codependent relationships, and when they have this pattern, is that they keep it quiet. You see, they're already, they get a new partner and they're already perceiving all these issues that are, getting repeated, the way they're being treated, the way they're rescuing the other person, and they see themselves and they feel the anxiety and the discomfort. But what they do is they get isolated. I don't know if you probably have friends like that once they engage in a relationship, they disappear from your sight.
That was me.
Okay, that was me too. So what happens is that they do that in order to continue allowing themselves living in that bubble of denial and not sharing with other people. Or if they do share, they lie. They create a fantasy of that reality. So they kind of like decorate their reality with the fantasy that looks like the perfect life, and it's not, because they don't want to share that, because the fear of of a person living in codependency is the fear of abandonment, is the fear of the relationship ending. So they will sacrifice anything for the relationship not to not to end, and that involves lying to other people or lying to yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
So going back to that, it's self-awareness, like having good honesty with yourself, reading books. One of the most popular books, it's Codependent No More.
Yes.
By Melody, is it Vito? I always forget her last name. Look it up, because she has a bunch of books on codependency. But the first one, Codependent No More, it was a bestseller, and it's a book that
you were right.
Everybody, when you read it, you relate to it, you identify your own issues, and it's just very impactful.
Yes.
And even though in her own story, it has to do with alcoholism and substance abuse and all that, we don't have to be dealing with substance abuse in order to be codependent. We could be dealing with relationships in which people that are extremely selfish, people that have narcissistic traits, people that are physically or emotional abusers, manipulators. And our tendency is to do that, because what happens when a codependent person matches with a person who has selfish and narcissistic traits, they continue chasing that love and that acceptance that the narcissistic person cannot give, because they don't have that in their psychological makeup. The way of controlling is by victimizing the other person, and that's how they achieve their own sense of security, because they also have another type of syndrome. So it's the type of relationship that matches very well, and it could be very exciting at the beginning, but eventually the red flags will appear within just a few months. So taking a look at yourself and doing a self-evaluation, and even if you're still in the relationship that doesn't serve you good, even if you know that you're not ready to let go, at least recognizing that you have those symptoms will guide you into getting the help that you need. But don't keep it quiet. You need to talk to at least a friend and really be transparent and very honest about everything that is going on. Don't cover it up. And then use books, go to groups, get a therapist. In my book, there is actually a few examples about codependency. I think there is an example that I use in my book of a male who grew up in a very neglectful family, and somehow he developed the belief system that he needed to be the rescuer of his family and the rescuer of people. And he drove himself to be very successful financially. So this person goes around and attracting and always ending up with relationships with women that are, users and manipulators. And they take advantage, and not only women, but also friends, and the family continues taking advantage of this person. And he always feels that it's never good enough, and he doesn't give enough. He always feels guilty when a relationship breaks up, because his sense of responsibility is always there. His sense of responsibility for other people, and he always feels a void that he can never do enough, because at the end of the day, the void is within you. It's not about other people. It's about what you feel about yourself, because you don't feel complete. You don't feel good enough. You don't feel that anybody's going to accept you or love you, because you don't love yourself unless you give and overgive. And by the act of, making yourself so necessary, you maintain the other person attached to you and dependent to you. So what happens is that the relationship might continue and may, last over life, but it will be one of those relationships that we call love-hate relationships, that people stick together, but they love and hate each other at the same time. And they feel very miserable. And this is a sad news, Jessie, but I see a large number of relationships overall that fit that profile. I would dare to say that the majority of the relationships that I know from friends, family, and patients do fit that profile.
Yeah,
and my own relationships in the past, did fit that profile.
Same.
Because as I have shared with you, I grew up in a very overprotected home, and that generated, a lot of fear and a lot of enmeshment. Sleeping with the parents, being so enmeshed with the family, not being able to be alone, not being able, to be without a relationship once one relationship is finished. That tendency to jump into another one because you cannot stand that void and that sense of loneliness. And that sense of loneliness comes from not having a connection with yourself, not having that most important relationship, which is the relationship with ourselves. Right. And we don't allow ourselves to cultivate that because of that fear, that pain that we feel when we are alone, and that, extreme anxiety.
Yes. I think something that you're, one of the many things that I admire about you, especially when working with individuals that are in that season of self-realization that they are the codependent person, that they have these patterns, that they need to make a change, is that you've always been able to turn it around for them and look at it as a positive, in terms of that they have the power within themselves to make that difference. We want viewers to be reminded that this isn't the end, this is the beginning, this is the continuation of a great story. So with these tools, with reflections of your mirror, and with Edith's many years of experience working with so many different types of clients, this is of great value. And then for her to share her own story and giving me the opportunity to also share that we've been through there. We've been in denial, and we've had to just come to the drawing board and say, you know what, I can't do this by myself. I need the resources. I'm done. I want to have that life that I dream of, and you can achieve it. Louise Hay is someone that came to mind about the positive affirmations, and you really drew that home for me. You drove that home for me in my own personal work as a colleague. And I used to write Post-its on my mirror and say, and I wouldn't even, when I would read it, I'm like, this is so ridiculous, you are beautiful. Like,
I know.
Anyone that comes into my bathroom is gonna think I'm nuts. But I put them today. I've been putting them for years, since I did the resistance breaker with you. And Abigail, I speak life into her all the time. She has phrases in her wall that reminds her of who she is. So I think that would be cool for you to share, some tools in that aspect, how people can start restoring that self-love and self-discovery as they accept that it's not to categorize anyone. It's just to give them a guide and an outlet so that they can get well and they can have that fruitful, beautiful life that they deserve.
Definitely. And one of what I notice with people is that it's not sometimes that they don't recognize it. You might take people to a level of recognizing it, but what they fear the most is taking the step to get out of the situation, because the fear of letting go of that relationship, letting go of the addiction, letting go, of that job, what you feel like, taken advantage of, or you don't feel fulfilled, letting go of anything, of any attachment in life in which they feel safe is excruciating, it's extremely painful. So people don't feel the capacity, the ability to do that unless they find another another item to be addicted to.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to take people by the hand and actually encourage them to even when they have the tools, because what happens, Jesse, is that anxiety, it's a disorder, and what happens is that the emotions take control over their body, and they feel incapable of breaking through. So I want people to know that it is painful, it is not easy, and they will need a lot of support in doing that. So just by reading a book, it's not enough. That's why in my book, it's not only about talking about this, but giving them tools that they can use in order to do that, including the confrontation of going to a physician and getting medicated. Because sometimes even though I'm very holistic, as you know, but if you need to get medicated, you get medicated, because sometimes your body's symptoms take possession over you. The body is a subconscious mind, and the pain that you experience having to go through a breakup, having to go through a change, being by yourself and all that, it's so overwhelming that people actually get sick. So it might be necessary for them to, for a while, go through a supervised medication treatment in order to quiet those emotions, so they can, at the same time doing their personal work and doing therapy, they can control the body, and they can make the necessary changes for personal growth. So even if you have to go to the extreme of that for a while, don't feel bad, but do it. Mm-hmm. No matter what, because it's always going to be better. And at some point in your life, you're going to look back at your old self, and you're going to say, oh my God, I'm not that person anymore, and I don't want to be there ever. And I don't know how I survived in that body, in that self. How was I able to sustain that amount of pain and anxiety and feeling so miserable in a relationship?
Yes, and I think how you were saying about the physiological effects of anxiety and just being in these relationships that are not healthy, it does take a toll on your health. But then when you turn it around and you start to get well, and you start to set these healthy boundaries, you start to build a relationship with yourself, the universe brings people that were in that season that you were in, so that you can help them. Because I would be like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was in that position. But then because you have this awareness, okay, are they really put into my path so that I can help them? Or am I here to just make sure I have discernment and knowing that I have to have healthy boundaries and perhaps have a relationship with them or not? But then you're able to share the resources, and you're able to help them figure things out. Because I know that with me, whether it was male or female, whether it was an intimate relationship or just like a professional relationship, whatever it may be, I had to first make sure it was like a checklist in my brain. Like, what are their priorities, and like, do they have their own things going for themselves? How you know, just for me personally, I had to just make sure that I knew it was aligned with the way that I was walking in my self-development, and that it wasn't becoming a codependent friendship or relationship. But you see it in others. You start identifying like, okay, that's an interesting relationship right there. But then you have that power to know that you won't allow that again to happen in your life. So I think those are great examples, and I love that you reminded the viewers that in your book you have tools so that they can start applying them. And I love the examples and the characteristics that you highlight, especially in the self-sufficiency, regarding the self-love and happiness. And that transition, I think people will anticipate, because it's like, okay, this is me, now what? So I love that it builds people up as they go through the book. But Edie, that kind of wraps up our questions. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else. I think you gave, the next one was giving advice to the viewers regarding, you know, if this is something that they identify with, any advice or suggestions. Did you want to add anything else before we wrap up?
Well, I also wanted to say that, you know, even though it's understood that the step is, you know, painful and it requires, you know, a lot of work, the rewards are amazing, because the style of your life and your relationships, your overall relationships are going to change, and the people and the situations that you will attract into your life once the work is done, it's totally different from what you had before. One of the good rewards that you will get is that you will become a freer person. So you will have, you know, a relationship in which you don't have to lie, in which you don't have to hide who you are, and you don't have to, you know, ask permission, you know, to do something, or feel like you're walking on eggshells, or that your partner is going to be upset because you are who you are and you like the things that you like, or you want to go and spend time with your friends or something like that. You don't have to live in prison anymore. You create a friendship of your relationship, which is the way it should be. You know, relationships should share, you know, equal freedom and equal power. And I want to tell people that, you know, that there is some degree of codependency in any relationship, but there has to be a healthy codependency. A healthy codependency is the give and take normal of human interactions, because in every relationship, and the closer we are, you know, we depend on one another, and that's okay. Yeah. But it should not get to the point in which it takes away your personal freedom. So I want to say to people that a relationship should be categorized as codependency whenever the freedom of one of the individuals is compromised. Because when it gets to that point, it becomes a controlling relationship. It is no longer, you know, a partnership. And that's something that, you know, for people is very hard to define, because culturally we have been taught that a codependent relationship is the way it should be. Controlling one another, you know, and rescuing one another. It's, you know, and being so enmeshed is what we have, you know, learned to perceive as love, but it isn't. And it will cause, you know, suffering, anxiety. And anxiety is one of the symptoms that if it's very severe in one person, it might be something that you have to work on for the rest of your life. But the more you work on it, the more, you know, freedom you're going to attain, and the more your body is going to feel at ease at every aspect and every interaction in your life.
Yes. That's great, Edie. Thank you so much. Well, that wraps up our video for today regarding codependency, what it is and how did we get here, and what are some of the signs, what are some of the tools that you can use. And in our second part for our December video, we're going to be talking about codependency in terms of in our adult life, what are the things that we can see that are constant. So it'll be characteristics in our adult life, and selfishness versus self-love. So I really think that that's going to be of value for those that have watched this video. Thank you so much. If you haven't watched the previous videos, Change is Attainable and Self-Awareness, we recommend that you go check those out. And then we'll see you next month for the next round of part 2 of Codependency. Thank you so much, everybody, for sticking around. Have a great day.
Thank you.